The next video in the series is going to bring us right at the doorstep of Leviathan and conclude the theme of trust. This one is going to go deeper into perspectives, and I'd like to start it by merging it with another theme and talk about perspectives of God. The Old Testament God and the New Testament God are different characters in the same way that any character feels different in a sequel that's written by different people who have a different worldview they are trying to communicate. The main advantage of the Old Testament God for me is that he doesn't pretend to be a good guy. He's a straight-up abusive father, or, as they used to call them at the time, father. When it comes to Moses, for instance, not only does God send an angel to turn baby Moses into a mute, or at least cause him to have a severe stutter, he keeps giving him challenges that would be much easier to overcome with words, all throughout his life. Moses is the adopted son of the Pharaoh's daughter, which means he sees both the perspective of an Egyptian and a proto-Jew. One day, as he walks around the palace, he sees a slave driver beating a slave to death. And he wants to say, "Hey man, stop. This is a human being and their suffering has meaning." But he can't, so he kills the slaver and buries him in sand. Later, as he and his posse of renegade slaves are wandering through the desert dying of thirst, Moses begs God to save his people. God leads Moses to a rock and tells him that if he speaks to it, water will come out. Moses can't or is embarrassed to, so he strikes the rock with his staff. Water still comes out, but God remembers that disobedience and will forbid Moses entry to the promised land, which he spent his entire life working for. As they approach Canaan, Moses goes up a mountain to speak to God, which he knows is going to take a while. So he tells the Israelites to wait for him, and whatever they do, not start making up new idols to worship. He doesn't really say that. I'm making that part up to make the narrative clearer, but God did deliver them from slavery at this point, so they should know. Up on Mount Sinai, Moses isolates himself for 40 days of silence and fasting. This is real shit. The longest I've spent without talking is 7 days, and even then I had the relief of having someone talk to me to give me meditation instructions. Still, after 3 or 4 days, spent mainly alone with the horrors of my own mind, strange things started happening. Really strange things. After 40 days of this, Moses comes down from the mountain with one of the most powerful ideas ever conceived, a new form of godhood that is formless and without image, and 10 laws allegedly given by this God. But what is the point of these laws? When I was in elementary school, it really bothered me that I was expected to believe that a God that created 1 trillion galaxies cares whether or not I have bacon for breakfast. How could I affect him? The only answer I found satisfactory is that the point of these laws, of this myth, is to facilitate social cohesion. The worship of Yehovah is a mechanism for the maintenance of a society in which people trust each other. I'm leaving a slightly more detailed interpretation if you want to pause and read right now. So, as Moses comes down from the mountain with this new, arguably, tool for social cohesion, he sees that the Israelites have made a golden calf and begun worshipping it, the one thing he told them not to do. So what does the father figure of the Jewish people do, this religion that's so appreciative of words and their power? Does he tell them that he's not angry, he's just disappointed? Of course not. He lets his hands do the talking. With the help of the Levites, he kills 3,000 people to get the message across. Onili that we've seen, as well as the Siberian, the Endbringers, and Kefri that we haven't yet, are full-on mutes, and their only interaction with the world is through violence. Rachel and Bakuda are halfway mutes, and power is their main medium to other people, specifically fear. Brian and Lisa have their ability to communicate obstructed internally. There is stuff they can't talk about, and where personality cannot manifest, power takes its place. Brian shows strength where he can't talk about weakness. Lisa makes snarky remarks when she perhaps would have preferred to seek companionship. Alec can't even communicate his own emotions to himself. And Taylor's communication in this arc is obstructed in a very realistic way. She's awkward as hell. But unlike the others, she tries. She succeeds more than any of the others in building lines of communication with Lisa, Brian, and Rachel. But that success starts with trying to see things through the perspectives of other people. She is the only one that wonders, what is it that holds Rachel back from communicating? Lisa was given this information by her power. Taylor sought it out. That's understandable. Rachel is a teammate. What's more impressive is that even as she fights Bakuda, Taylor wonders what was it that made Bakuda obstruct her own voice? What was it that fused together Bakuda and Fear? So the Undersiders go back to the loft after having a heart-to-heart over some burgers. They find out that Rachel is gone, and she isn't answering her phone, so reasonably they go to check on the money. First of all, a game of information. The Undersiders hide their boatloads of cash in a place that is unmarked in a disorganized lot of storage units. They say that this is intentional. It makes their own storage unit harder to find. The same disadvantage is going to work against them, though. The units around them are full of ABB people waiting in ambush. They're about to be outplayed. They get attacked by Uber and Lit. They are video game-themed supervillains that go as far as dressing up like GTA characters and beating up prostitutes, while their Tinker-made camera is floating next to them and streaming it on the dark web. Uber has the power to copy skills, which in itself gives the reader an opportunity to think about how even something as brutish as kickboxing is so reliant on knowledge. Lit is the tinker that got me into the interpretation that thinker powers are metaphors for writing. He can more or less make anything, but he can only make it once. If he tries to do the same thing again, it's less effective. And even more importantly, if it tries to do something similar, it's weaker. The more similar to something he did before, the less effective. The more original, the more effective. You know, just like story ideas. I guess this is a good point as any to note that every single power in Worm is different. Not just so that Taylor will have to have a battle of information with them, but also to keep you, the reader, interested. Even in matters of personality, not one of the gazillion characters is identical to another. Anyway, the Undersiders really hate Uber and Lit at this point, even more than they did before their money was stolen, and Tattletale feels entitled to rip into them even harder than usual. Uber, Mensch, has significantly more potential than Lit and is way cooler. Lit seems kind of maladjusted. Tattletale attacks that weak spot, saying, "Why do you even have him on your team? This guy screws up half your jobs." And Uber simply answers, "He's my friend." This is an anagnorisis, however small. This simple admission shows that these horrible people are, despite everything, capable of friendship. When I asked the subreddit what they would like me to talk about in an analysis like this, some people mentioned this moment, which means I shouldn't be talking about it. You already know this. What I should be talking about is how Tattletale and Regent, the people that we are cheering for, are trying to sabotage this precious and wholesome thing that is going on between these two people. It took me a long time to realize how similar Lisa is to Emma. The reason it was hard to notice, the reason what Emma does feels so different from what Lisa does, is who it's done to. Similarly to Gigi and the Nazis, we find violence more palatable the worse we think the victims of it are. Uber and Lit apply physical violence on the most vulnerable people in society for laughs, and this is really important here. Taylor says that she watched their live stream, and even describes the fear she felt when she got a glimpse of how Emma and Sophia see her. But how would she? She doesn't have a home computer. She doesn't have friends to watch this with. Am I to believe that she streamed snuff on the public library computer? I think the author was aware that this is strange, but still wanted to convey to us that Taylor saw Uber and Lit earning high villainy scores. Why? So we don't feel bad when Telltale drives them to the edge of suicide. Well, Lit, at least. Lit doesn't strike me as someone very socially capable. When he tries to roar, it comes out as a screech. He's got one friend which he seems very dependent on, and the computer game obsession... Don't get me wrong, I agree with them that computer games are one of the highest forms of art, but making your whole personality revolve around it is a pretty bad sign. Leet doesn't seem like he's very far from giving up on life, and Tattletale hits him hard. That's one of the things that sends somebody home to have one of the worst nights of their lives, or the last one. Gee, I wonder what Lisa's trauma is about. Bakuda arrives, completing the Bomberman theme, and she starts destroying the Undersiders. That's because it's not the Undersiders she's up against, not fully. Without Bitch, without Bugs, they're just a bunch of very knowledgeable teenagers and the Cramp Master. Knowledge is a multiplier of power. If you give a baby perfect knowledge of all of the martial arts that ever existed or could exist, it would still lose to a healthy adult. This doesn't really apply to Tattletale's power. That by itself can be used as a sort of attack, but because Bakuda has all of the raw power, she can counter Tattletale easily. She simply tells her minions to shoot Tattletale the moment she opens her mouth. But of course, we're past the theme of information at this point. This is basic. Wildbow adds on top of that the layer of different perspectives. Here's a good example of what makes this book so beautiful. Talking about Tattletale's powers, Bakuda says this.
Don't know your powers. Maybe it's a subsonic thing, altering moods as you talk. Maybe it's something else.
Even before we see the vibrating bombs that turn people into jelly, it stands to reason that Bakuda's intuition changed during her trigger event to think more about vibrations and subsonic effects than about human emotions. It's easier for her to imagine some undiscovered physiological effect than it is for her to imagine a supervillainess who delivers dangerously sick burns. In that regard, she's not very different from most people who write superheroes. I literally can't wrap my head around how this fight drives forward each one of the thematic threads that we talked about while still being plot-driven. The fact that Bakuda attacks the Undersiders is a direct result of Taylor taking Lung out of commission and stealing the money, making the Undersiders a target for revenge and a lucrative one. A lesser author would have made it so Taylor is the only one taking initiative or that other villains randomly surprise her, but we get the best of both worlds. It feels like everybody is in the midst of making their own moves, and so when Taylor takes action, she interferes with an existing web of interactions. But that's not enough. Bakuda also develops the theme of power. In the first fight with Lung, there was no cooperation, there was just pure power. He tried his best to hurt Taylor. Taylor tried to hurt him. The Wards, on the other hand, were a group with cooperation, but they had to play nice. Bakuda takes the best of both worlds. She uses deadly force, but she also has minions. How does she make the minions cooperate? By planting bombs in people's heads and making it easy to apply pure power whenever she wants, she ascends from pure power to a slightly more subtle form of power, fear. Bakuda herself monologues about creating fear. It feels like an info dump, but it isn't. First of all, her maniacal monologuing isn't character. When we think about Armsmaster, it's weird that he's riding around on a bike fighting supervillains when he could be consulting for Nvidia instead. But when we ask why is Bakuda throwing bombs at teenagers instead of making millions working for NASA, the answer is kind of obvious. She likes it. She's having, excuse my pun, a blast. More importantly, the magic is in what's not being said. She speaks of the strengths of fear, but not of its weaknesses. The first disadvantage of fear is presented to us through the hesitation of her minions to comply. The second disadvantage of fear is how it makes your enemies escalate and rally against you. In the next scene, we're going to see how Coil manages to avoid specifically that adverse effect. So the Undersiders are trapped in this maze of storage lockers and they barely survive the barrage of bombs. There is a fear of death that we didn't really have before. And because the Undersiders are a group in a fight to the death, this is where we have a chance to see them build trust for real. When Bakuda throws an ice bomb, Gru protects Tattletale with his body, even though he doesn't know how deadly it's going to be. This is how you earn people's trust. You show them that you will suffer so that they won't. Knowing that someone will suffer so you won't is what trust is, or at least that's my definition for now. Gru even explains to Taylor that he needed to choose between whom to protect, and chose Lisa only because her costume leaves more skin exposed. He expends extra effort to protect Taylor's emotions from being hurt by the fact that he chose to defend someone else. I gotta say, I didn't like Brian at first, but he grew on me. Ay! Similarly, the indifferent Regent shows that he's worthy of trust by saving Gru. When Gru is alone in front of Bakuda's jeep, about to get run over, Regent decides to overuse his powers, knowing that it will cause him intense, continuous pain. He chooses to suffer for his friend. The reason the Undersiders survive this bout is that they actually care about one another. These are acts of heroism as we define them, choosing to suffer for someone else. Though the heroic score is still below 1. That is, Regent inflicts on himself less suffering, a week of cramping, than he is sparing Gru, getting run over by a car. Same with Gru covering Tattletale when his skin is covered but hers isn't. Taylor sees these and thinks that this is the same type of heroism that she tries to embody. But it isn't. It's loyalty. Regent wouldn't suffer for a stranger. He has a bond of trust with Gru. He's not Jesus of Nazareth. He's more like a personal Jesus, someone to hear your prayers specifically, someone who cares not for everybody, but specifically for you. This is a mistake that we're going to see Taylor paying for in the next video. Taylor gets hit with a pain bomb, and even though it's described in detail how horrible it is, the scenes of physical pain are never as memorable as scenes of emotional pain, because this is a book. The reason that this is still here is that following the karmic principle, Taylor gets better at what she does, which in this case is enduring pain. The narration of Taylor right after the concussion is great for 3 reasons. One is that you are taking into the mind of someone in that perspective, in that mindset, or more accurately, brain set. Once again, we shift. The second is that it's accurate. I wish I didn't know this, but this is what getting a concussion feels like. I don't want to speculate about the author's life, so I won't. The third is the description of Gru being tied to a pole with a cloud of darkness surrounding him and only a pair of medical tweezers sticking out of his face. The tweezers that Bakuda used to shove a bomb up his nasal cavity and just left there. This is not just visceral and cool. It lets you feel Bakuda's deep lack of respect for other people. Also, she penetrates Gru's body. It was really important for the author to show people being attacked while making sure that nobody mistakes it for something cool or fun. Taylor uses the information that Telltale gave her, information that Telltale could only give her because Bakuda's perspective on Telltale's power was skewed, in order to cut off Bakuda's toes and with them the bomb detonator, and so saves the day. Taylor gets treated for the concussion and the pain, and in a book filled to the brim with suffering, like my life, we get this short reprieve where Taylor just gets to relax in front of the TV with her friends, while Danny serves them hot drinks. Well, almost gets to relax. As Taylor wakes up on the sofa, hearing Lisa talking to Danny, she feels a terror that has nothing to do with the practical implications of being found out. What scares her is the merging of perspectives of herself that she wanted to keep separate. Taylor tried to keep 2 different perspectives active at the same time. One with the loft and the supervillainy, and the other with her father and her relatively normal life. By the end of this arc, these worlds are going to collide. Speaking of information going where it shouldn't, when Taylor is under pain medication, she can take more sensory data from her bugs. She can listen through them. Why couldn't she before? Because it hurts, and the medication suppresses that pain. The reader, too, is going to be bombarded with painful, complex information and is going to be challenged into taking it in. Why? As a preparation for the real world, of course. What, you thought this book was entertainment? That the goal was to have a good time? Quoting Max Steiner quoting Ludwig Wittgenstein, I don't know why we are here, but I'm pretty sure that it is not in order to enjoy ourselves. Villains Meetup. Bakuda escapes and later starts a bombing campaign that made me nostalgic for growing up in the Middle East in the 90s. That forces Brockton Bay's villains to meet up to discuss how they're going to cooperate to take her down. What power pushes them to cooperate? None of the villain teams have a connection of authority, dependence, and certainly not trust with the others. They may have a power to apply inside of their own teams, but none of them can induce inter-team cooperation. Then what is it that unites them? Fear. The fear that Bakuda generated. This is the real disadvantage of fear as a form of power. It makes your enemies cooperate too. I'm not going to talk about all of the different characters here, just the ones that push the themes forward. The travelers arrive, but the only members of this group I want to mention are Trickster, and the one that's named after the first and most referenced book of the Bible, and I've already said everything I had to say about her in this very sentence. Trickster introduces the travelers and asks for a seat at the table, and Coil permits it. Reading this dialogue for the second time isn't amazing, but it's interesting to note that Coil and Trickster know each other and pretend not to, and Telltale knows that they know each other and also pretends not to. Show me one superhero movie where something like this happens, and is at the same time clear enough that you can see the 2 layers yourself simply by watching twice. But why do they pretend not to know each other? In order to not induce fear. Check it. Coil's play here is simple and brilliant. If you've ever played a game like Munchkin or Tokyo King, you know that moment when one player becomes too strong and all of the other players start ganging up on them. It's a simple incentive. If you are 3rd place, of course you don't want to help 2nd place win, but you'll do whatever you can to prevent the strongest player from finishing the game on the next turn. Coil is by far the strongest player in town. Not only does he have his own group of mercenaries and loads of cash, he also has the travelers and the undersiders under his wing. That's 3 out of 7 villain groups in town, while out of the 4 left, Fault Line's crew is up for hire, the merchants are a non-issue, and not only are the ABB about to disappear, Coil is actively getting the other teams to make the ABB disappear for him. Coil is close to finishing the game. He wants control of the entire city, something that he might achieve as long as he doesn't let anyone know how strong he is. Pretty sure Lisa similarly hides her true power from the rest of the Undersiders, and for similar reasons. The villains agree to a truce, but it is a super flimsy one. According to Tattletale, all of the different factions are scheming how to backstab each other. Why? Because fear is an ineffective tool to induce cooperation. The Undersiders cooperate because of trust, which made them strong against Bakuda. But they don't all trust each other. Bitch doesn't trust any of them. She's motivated by dependence on their boss for money and fear of Brian. And in that very meeting, we see how those fail, when Hukulf demands compensation for Bitch's attack on his dogfighting ring. Worth mentioning, Rachel suffers so that dogs won't. Brian is a good frontman for the Undersider because the job demands that he seem in control, which is what his psyche is already geared for. The fact that Taylor is there even though she is still suffering from a concussion is a choice Brian made with the goal of communicating strength. The edited videos they hand out of the fight with Bakuda are cut specifically not to show how helpless the Undersiders were 99% of the fight. But as he finds out that one of his team members is out starting fights without his knowledge, he is in danger of people from the outside seeing how little cooperation his team has, which means how weak they are. Brian's got 99 problems and Rachel is definitely one of them. Just like with Amy surprising Taylor, we are not surprised because we've seen this in Brutus's magnificent interlude. Without Brutus's interlude, this could have felt like Rachel's breach of trust came out of nowhere. By the way, what's the name for a breach of trust? But because we're not surprised, we can see this as natural cause and effect while seeing Brian navigate this ebb and flow of events, the full scope of which he can't quite see. This deepens that feeling of being tangled in a web of causes and effects, while developing the theme of failures in cooperation. A theme that we're going to get even deeper into when Taylor punches Emma in the face. So Taylor and her dad go to the mall where they accidentally meet Emma and her dad. The dads don't know, Emma knows and doesn't say, Taylor knows and can't say. Again, Wildbow just takes the worst parts of our adolescence and forces us to look at them. Just being stuck there, unable to speak when someone who's actively destroying your life flaunts to you the kind of information pocket they've built around you. Around Taylor. This is a painful read, and I'd like to try and explain why that's a good thing. I've read some fanfiction literally for research purposes, and found 2 categories particularly interesting. One can be summarized as, Lisa pretends not to be jealous as she helps Taylor pick clothes for a date with a girl. It's light, it's comfy, it's everything that the author didn't want to spend time on, and it's almost always in this time period. It's like the writers just want the characters to catch a break. It feels safe. The other is the opposite, and could be described as, what if the bullying was even worse? Writers take one of the characters, usually Taylor, and make her go through the most horrible stuff. I would have pegged it for sadism if it weren't for the first-person narration. Often genuinely beautiful, heartbreaking narration. These people are going through something during the writing. You can tell which one I'm vibing with more. And it took me a while to understand why I kept reading these stories. My best answer so far is that there's a catharsis in diving into these painful scenarios while having the defense of it not happening to you but to Taylor. And I think that happens in the canon too. One of the reasons this book has so much suffering is because we connect with it. Just like Taylor's fist connects with Emma's face. Taylor punches Emma, or more accurately, Taylor realizes that she has punched her. It is important that the punching itself does not appear in the narration, that Taylor isn't conscious of the act of punching. Not just because she hasn't made the decision, but because it parallels Brian's surprise, as he finds out after the fact that Rachel acted without his knowing. A part of Taylor wanted to attack Emma for a long time, but it was under control. That control slipped for an instant, and that was enough. The different parts of Taylor's psyche aren't coordinated. We've already talked about the theme of internal conflict. It is, I stress, everywhere. If you want to know more about this from a neurological standpoint, I recommend reading Scott Alexander's posts on the hungry brain. The book gives a model of the brain as a team of competing agents and gives a lot of good insights about how to get yourself to do things. And I enjoyed reading the whole thing, but I love biology. I would love to talk about how the prefrontal cortex normally utilizes GABAergic projections in order to inhibit the amygdala, and how a concussion interferes with that process. But I think for the purposes of this essay, it would be better to say instead that Taylor fails to control herself. Taylor finds that her body applied pure power when that is not a good strategy. Shadowstalker arrives and tells Danny off, which Taylor finds hilarious. Shadowstalker is a teenage girl, and not only is she talking to Danny as if he is a subordinate, Danny speaks to Shadowstalker as if she is his superior. Again, the power is authority, but Shadow's authority is earned from her ability to apply pure power in the service of the establishment. Punching people in the face is permitted under some circumstances and forbidden under others. And disobeying the rules of the society that you are in invites retaliation not just from the person you attacked, but from everyone around you. When I was 12 or 13, I got into my first fight. Some guy slapped me in the face, and as he swung for a follow-up, he was wide open, so I kicked him in the lungs, just like I practiced in karate class particularly for this purpose. I wasn't really sure what to do after, but when he was bent over, it seemed like a good idea to punch him in the jaw. So I did. He didn't lose consciousness or anything, he just looked at me as if I were insane and left. Later, boys that weren't even involved came to warn me. They explained that you shouldn't punch somebody in the face. I started arguing, but they said that because it's my first fight and I didn't know, there will be no castigation. But next time when someone slaps me, I should really slap back, or they will have to get involved. That seemed idiotic to me. We were swinging our arms with the declared goal of causing each other damage. Why was the line drawn at the specific shape of my palm? But I see the logic in it now. If we limit ourselves to slaps, we can keep fighting without anyone getting their teeth knocked out, without getting the teachers involved. In the long term, everyone benefits from that sort of cooperation. This is why the other boys in my year had to do something about me, just like the rest of the villains have to do something about Bakuda. Just like the school will have to do something about Taylor in The Meeting at School is one of the hardest scenes to read. Ellen, Emma's father, calls up a meeting at the school at short notice. Like Gigi's mother, he is a lawyer, and a very skilled one, meaning that he is powerful within the battlefield of authority. Emma arrives with her father, Sophia with her guardian, and I don't care about medicine. In the prologue of Worm's sequel, Ward, you find out that she spat in Taylor's face at some point during high school, and it still makes me angry. Anyway, it took me a while to understand why this scene is so horrible. It's not Emma smirking, preemptively proud of herself for coming out of this scot-free. It's not her father talking as if his daughter is a victim or using her name while omitting Taylor's. I thought it had something to do with the teachers, but nothing they were saying was particularly horrible. I couldn't find it, so I stopped looking. Finally quoting Lao Tzu, if you want to be given everything, give everything up. I stopped reading Worm and went to read another book that was on my list. Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. I thought that if Wildbow gives this book the honor of being the only mention, and I owe this person so much, I should at least give it a try. I've said Oranges is a key or map to Worm, and what I meant by that is that the central concepts, like how everyone sees things differently and each perspective needs to be respected, are told in Oranges, even shown at times. But in Worm, they are developed to become the focus of the story. The protagonist of Oranges is raised in a religious community, and though she truly believes in God, she finds that her faith, her love, her moral compass all lead her to disagree with the society she lives in. This society, driven by Moses' vision to enforce social cohesion, retaliates against her. I don't want to spoil it because I had a good time reading it without knowing anything about it, except that Wilbur respected it so much to point at it. And I think that you, as somebody who enjoyed Worm and also watched this essay so far, should read it too. Though I will warn you that it has nothing of the fun exterior of Worm. No tactics, no winning, not even puns, just grim reality and beautiful people making beautiful decisions, even when the world is ugly towards them. Also, each chapter corresponds to a different book of the Old Testament, and there are a lot of Blake quotes. The prose is dry in a good way. The emotional impacts are often delivered through what isn't said. And for me, the most beautiful part of the book is one line where the protagonist contradicts herself, leaving it to the reader to figure out what actually happened. I was surprised by how similar the protagonist is to Taylor in the way that she suffers, and not only does her suffering go unnoticed, but she's often seen by her surroundings as the villain. There's a sharp, cold loneliness to that book, a feeling of being abandoned. And abandonment isn't about leaving. It's when somebody who cared no longer does. It's about that stinging insult when people act as if the world-breaking event that you've been through isn't that big of a deal. While reading Oranges, I realized what I was missing in the school meeting. It's what they weren't saying. Taylor arrives with pages upon pages of printed emails with the insults the girls were sending her every single day. And we hear the teachers say that they don't have time to read all of it, which might be true, but they don't say a single word on how horrible it must have been for Taylor. The teachers tell Taylor and her dad about their own difficulties, asking them to remember that kids are arriving at school with weapons. They talk a lot about what they can't do. But Taylor has had all of the happiness in her life taken away from her, and not one of the teachers reaches out, puts a hand on her shoulder, and says that they're sorry. And I don't even mean the kind of sorry that says, I take responsibility. They don't even say the weaker kind, the I'm sorry this happened to you. None of the things that they're saying is so bad, but the fact that nobody says, this is horrible and we have to solve this is enough. None of them care. The only other book besides Worm and Oranges where I've seen this contrast between bitter grief and total indifference is Behind the Mask by Louisa May Alcott, which we may talk about when we get to Dina. In Worm, Taylor's suffering has evolved. If before she suffered and the people responsible didn't know, now she's suffering and they don't care. This is significantly worse. At first, we could believe that the only reason Taylor wasn't getting help was because nobody knew. We could believe that Gladly is a single case of somebody who knows but doesn't act. But Wildbow stretches our capacity for disappointment. The betrayal isn't an instance, it's a process with stages until one finally accepts that nobody cares. Everybody's doing whatever they feel like and nobody's managing the whole situation. There is no administrator. This is what I meant by the death of God, that feeling that started with Taylor's mother dying. Not just because a car accident is random and meaningless. It's that Taylor's mom was the first God she knew. At some point, infant Taylor realized that the reason she was getting food when she was hungry was because of someone's will for her little universe to run well. Then she grew up and realized that her mom is not God, that she's just a person. And then, she wasn't even that. This is the process of ever-expanding disappointment that goes further and further outward. I got into an argument with somebody on the Parahumans subreddit. Based on one of my comments, they accused me of never being made to feel helpless. That's what I get for hope dumping, I guess. And that made me angry because my high school experience sucked. I basically had both Lisa's and Taylor's origin stories layered one on top of the other, and this person was invalidating that. But the real reason I was angry was that they were kind of right. Unlike Taylor, I could fight. There's a very real sense in which boys are allowed to fight, or at least were, when I was in high school. When the bullying was getting bad enough, I went to a karate dojo and learned how to kick a motherfucker in the lungs. My karate teacher absolutely loved me and kept scolding the other students for not being as motivated as I was, which I can now laugh at. I wasn't the best fighter in the world, but the more I proved that I could fight, the less I needed to. I meant what I said before about how shitty it is that Peter Parker's bullying stops the moment he gets powers. I had to practice every day in order to get good at fighting, and even the fights that I won were far from enjoyable. It was a process, but at the end of it, I would only get into 1 or 2 fights a year, being low-key vigilant the rest of the time. But even though I could fight, some of the acts of bullying were more subtle than others, and there was just nothing I could do about it. I just had to accept that I was going to feel shitty that day, because it amused somebody else that I did. It is a difficult emotion for a teenager to deal with, and one of the sources for my love for Taylor, for my love for this community, is that we've all felt it. The only thing that was worse than the bullying itself was getting scolded for getting into fights when it was by far the most horrible of the options that I had. My favorite teacher was a math teacher who actually laughed at my jokes, and I remember the day I stopped liking her. I remember the resentment I felt for being offered embarrassing solutions like ignoring my bullies or talking to them. I remember wondering if she'd never been in that situation, or if she was trying very hard to forget how helpless she'd been. And I don't think we should forget, not if we want to help others. This is why Wildbow takes us to the most horrible moment and offers us the opportunity to face it. Maybe it's self-serving to think so, but I think it takes the kind of strength to let yourself face your emotions like that. Weld tells Vista at some point, and I agree. I already talked about fanfic and the importance of suffering with Taylor, but I think there is something more here. There is a validation. I don't know about you, but I blame myself for not being smarter, for not doing things differently. I think that we were all in that state of mind of being angry at ourselves for what others did to us. But Taylor does everything that she can in the meeting. She does everything right, and it doesn't help. And she never blames herself. She never says that maybe if she did something differently, she wouldn't have been bullied. There's a reason people blame themselves, and the reason is that it gives them a feeling of control, alleviating the feeling of helplessness. There are many ways in which Taylor deceives herself, but this is not one of them. And that is a brave thing to not do. Remember that scene in Good Will Hunting where Robin Williams repeats the same sentence until Matt Damon starts crying? Do you remember what that sentence is? It's not your fault. Okay, so it's not Taylor's fault. Great. Now, what is she going to do with all of this pain and suffering? The same thing that she always does. Take it out on Lung. Cutting Lung's eyes out. Taylor and Danny lose at the school meeting. In the battlefield of authority, they are at a disadvantage. Taylor is distraught as she calls Lisa, asking if there's anything she can do to distract herself in the field of pure power. She's addicted, at this point, to putting on her costume as a sort of emotional avoidance. I think this has two main reasons. One is that hurting others makes you feel good. There was a research in rats that showed that if you stress them out and then let them tear apart a smaller creature, I think they used mice, the rats' cortisol levels decrease at the comfort of killing a weaker sentient being. God, I hate this universe sometimes. The second reason is that Taylor can't relax anymore. Sophia and Emma taught her that every reprieve harbingers a worse escalation. So Taylor ironically feels less stressed when she's out on the battlefield than she is at home, thinking about how things are about to get worse. And as she goes out to battle Lung, she joins one of the mixed teams of villains that are organized so no team will be able to screw over the others, because they have no trust between them. It becomes clear how important it is for Taylor to be the one in control. What starts as Taylor pointing out strategic insights quickly becomes her telling people what to do. She starts embodying the administrator that she finds missing in the world. I don't know if this is a real trauma response, but I love it. There's an important moment as she gets into formation with her assembled team where Kaiser just gets up and leaves, showing that you should either have trust with the people you try to cooperate with or one of the forms of power. Without them, nothing is stopping people from doing whatever they want. Again, I'm foregoing the tactics completely in favor of philosophy. Ani Lee puts the foot in the door for a very difficult philosophical thread about death and whether or not it's a real thing. I think death is a poorly defined concept that we should not fear, and I even think I could make an argument supporting that, but I don't think I can make that argument fun yet. So in the meantime, I'm just going to point out every time that Wildbow lets you go through a thought experiment about death, leaving you the homework of contemplating the impermanence of being on your own time. Ani Lee creates a clone of himself and then explodes. Does it make sense to say that he died? If Ani Lee asked me for $5, is the clone morally obligated to return them? Wildbow did something here where it's somehow known to Taylor that Ani Lee loses a piece of himself every time he teleports, which I think is a straight-up mistake. It makes the question easier. The clone isn't Ani Lee because they have this significant difference between them. But what if it were? With Bitch's dogs, we get something more substantial. The dogs grow gradually, but in the end they form a replica of the original within their abdomens. I'm pretty sure it's not the original inside because of the way the distance between the legs grows. The old dog becomes the monster and a new identical dog is formed inside. Can they be considered the same? One more thing that I have to say about Ani Lee. Ani Lee is a trained assassin. His job is stabbing people. He is literally a professional stabber. Taylor is a 15-year-old girl who was in like 1 or 2 fights. The fact that she blocks 2 knife strikes in quick succession should be noted. I didn't go through a lot of anti-knife training, but every single class I did take started with an explanation on how impossible it is to defend against someone who's actually trained in using a knife. The fact that she blocks 2 knife strikes in quick succession should be noted. The trusting interpretation of the author is that Taylor is extremely talented in hand-to-hand combat, and this should be taken as a clue for something. The distrusting interpretation is that the dude just didn't know. The fact that the author has a blind spot for the human body pulls the reader towards the distrusting interpretation. Beginner authors, please, if you want to write about fighting, don't get into an actual fight. Just do 1 class of judo or jiu-jitsu or kickboxing or muay thai or whatever, and feel what it's like to get your body slammed against the mats. I always give this advice to writers that consult me about fighting scenes, and if they follow that advice, their fighting scenes improve immensely. Quoting the Mishnah, none are as wise as the one with experience. Taylor capitalizes on the lessons learned from the first Lung fight, that anesthetics might be more effective than toxins if his power doesn't counteract them, and uses Nutra's hallucinogenic blood in order to incapacitate Lung. If there's anybody watching this that didn't read the book, hi, I hope you're still enjoying yourself. As he is incapacitated, Taylor cuts Lung's eyes out, gouges them out. Just like the first fight with Lung, the trusting interpretation is purely tactical. Lung heals, and if he regains consciousness, is going to be so much easier to fight without eyes. The other interpretation, remember how much sadistic glee Taylor felt in fucking up Lung's gonads? And she's coming in hot with all that rage over how the school treated her. There is no discussion about whether or not she enjoys it, only about whether that enjoyment motivates her. It doesn't feel good to think about how, in the first encounter, Taylor used the bugs, which she feels, to touch Lung's no-nos without his permission, and now, after drugging him, she's using his unconscious body to pleasure herself. Isn't it amazing how things can change when we call them a different name? An even worse framing would be to parallel the eye gouging with how the bullies go harder on Taylor every time she shows them she isn't broken. As far as Lung is concerned, Taylor arrived out of nowhere, caused him immense pain and humiliation, and the moment he strikes back, she doubles down on both. After the non-consensual surgery, Taylor reaches out to Sundancer to help her up, and Sundancer refuses the blood-covered hand. This seems trivial, but it isn't. Taylor, our detail-oriented to the point of being tiresome Taylor, forgot that her hands are slick with human blood. Why? Because she wants to ignore what she did, or more accurately, her own subconscious mind is building an image of her that is less monstrous. This is what I mean when I say that the shifting of perspectives is not just cool, it's what this book is. This is The Importance of the Interludes. I think the interludes in general have two main functions. The first is presenting an argument about how in real life we see so little of who people really are. The other is to build our trust in the author. After seeing how much depth there is to the characters that have been presented in the interludes, we naturally come to suspect that every character has that kind of depth. The reader gets this feeling of a real world we only get a glimpse of. And because each of the characters has their unique perspective, almost every scene could be written differently from the perspective of different characters. It's no wonder that Parahumans has so much fanfiction. It begs the reader to write their own, even while reading. That impression is augmented in the chapters where we follow Taylor with these little moments that remind us of what we've seen in the interludes that seduce us to see other people's perspectives. Like when Taylor asks Lisa whether she could bug her with a question about her power, and Alec chuckles. He asks if the pun was intended, and Taylor doesn't know what he's talking about, but you, the reader, can figure it out. Every interaction between Brian and Brutus reminds you that Brutus is afraid of Brian because he doesn't have any smell, something that none of the Undersiders know about, and also leads to one of the cutest scenes in the book later on. When Taylor sees that Gregor and Neuter have matching tattoos, she thinks that they got them together because they're bros. Alec tells her that they just had a particularly unlucky trigger event. Both are wrong, and finding out that they're wrong isn't even my favorite part of Gregor's interlude. Kafka's excellent short story, The Metamorphosis, starts with the line, "As Gregor awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed into a monstrous vermin." Gregor is a monstrosity. We've known that before. At this point, we have a suspicion that trigger events have to do with who the person is, with what they wanted to become. And so Gregor, with his see-through skin, with his slime-blasting abilities and barnacles growing all over him, what kind of person prayed for this power? There's a reason I pretend not to know these things. The thing that made the reading experience so good was the process of finding out. The author, like a good teacher, lets us get confused, try to take a guess, get it wrong, and only then confronts us with our wrong conclusions and lets us come to the right ones, without ever getting us discouraged. This is rarer than it seems. Gregor is the sweetest guy. We start with him talking to the guy he pays to buy him stuff. He can't go to 7-Eleven without it being, awkward. But he doesn't want to bother his friends either, which seems to be his main motivation. He meets another mercenary, Neuter, who's busy hanging out with two beautiful women and charming them with his super villainy. Though, A quick analysis of his name hints that he doesn't plan to do much more than that. One of the girls gives Gregor the sexy eyes, but Gregor rejects her. He thinks she's a fetishist and he wants to have a real connection with another human being. He's like the opposite of a monster. When said woman asks him where his accent comes from, he answers the most interesting answer possible. Do you remember what it was? The most interesting answer to the question, where is your accent from, is, I don't know. Which leaves us in complete darkness. But darkness isn't interesting, so Gregor shines a single light. According to the language expert he talked to, the other language he speaks is Icelandic. What does that even mean? Every piece of background information that we get here is important to something that we'll see in the future. Going back and reading this is amazing. Not a single sentence is wasted. Again, Armsmaster, my dudes. For instance, the author wants to give us an exposition on the Manton effect, which is an important reconstruction. I remember reading the X-Force comic, or some other X-Men spin-off, and being pumped to see Nightcrawler teleporting a shark into somebody's gut, or some edgy shit like that. Were I not a child, my reaction would have been disappointment. My dude was in hundreds of fights where deadly force was used, and you're telling me the only reason he didn't do that before was because he didn't think about it? Again, where was Beast? In Worm, instead of making it more gritty by having people use their telekinesis to pull people's eyes out, it is set as fact that people can't do that. And again, because people interact with that fact, it feels like an interesting, mysterious detail instead of something that you're expected to ignore because, like, the writers can't be expected to think about this stuff. We deserve better art, goddammit, and we should demand it. Faultline, the leader of Gregor's crew, knows that her power of creating fault lines only works on dead matter, but she doesn't know if the inhibition is technical or psychological, so she tries stuff out. She experiments, which, again, makes her more of an agent than every single character in the Marvel Universe. Gregor and Faultline talk about how some people unlock their power's potential in a situation of great stress, calling it a second trigger event, which is going to be super important. And as soon as they are done talking, Gregor walks up to Faultline and starts choking her. It's just confusing enough to be surprising, but clear enough that we could guess why he'd do it. It doesn't work, though. She can't cut through him. And even if she did, she might have killed him. She's almost angry at him for putting his own life at risk, because, quoting Uber, he's her friend. But he says that it would have been a worthy sacrifice. Gregor's heroism is the first that passes the score of 1. Bro was ready to die so that Faultline could live with a slightly stronger power. He is more heroic, or at least more loyal, than Taylor, by far. Wait, is he though? What is it about Gregor that makes my suicidality sense tingle? It feels like he doesn't really care so much whether he lives or dies. It's a suicidal worthlessness that isn't nihilistic, and this is important. I don't hate Rick and Morty. There are many episodes that I really loved, but the nihilism, it always struck me as childish. Gregor thinks his own life doesn't matter, but he still loves his friends. He doesn't even want to do what's right, I don't feel like. He just wants them to be happy. I like him, but I don't love him. Why? After Danny's interlude, I thought that what I love about these characters is that they suffer, try, and love. Is it that Gregor doesn't try that hard that ruins him for me? Or that he doesn't love himself? I'm kind of indifferent to seeing more of him. Where is my formula for likable characters flawed? Canary's interlude gives us another perspective on this question. Canary has been royally screwed. Her life has been completely destroyed in another very Old Testament way. She underestimated the power of her own words. Everything about the trial reeks of panic and bigotry, a more mature version of what X-Men were trying to do. The whole, they hate us because they fear us, and they fear us because they don't understand us. But it's so much better than just a bunch of dude caving some green guy's skull in an alleyway. You can see how people would be terrified of a woman that can literally kill you by telling you to go fuck yourself. You can understand why the judge would insist on having her tongue in restraints for hours. She's being tortured, but it's up to interpretation whether they want to torture her. Canary isn't the interesting part of this interlude. Bakuda is. I remember reading this and finding that I suddenly really liked Bakuda. Why? Because As she's taken in a secure van to a hole from which nobody ever escapes, a piece of information we got from Gigi because everything is connected, and she has nothing to use to her advantage but her mouth, she uses it in a completely different way than your mom would. She chews a metal wire off of Canary's gag, gets Lung angry enough to use fire in order to soften the metal, and chews it, which fucking hurts, to fashion a screwdriver out of it. Bakuda now suffers greatly and tries her best. This is an incomplete formula. There is nobody that she loves, nobody that she cares about. And so I don't like her, but I sort of root for her. I like her as much as I do Gregor. I think the formula here is something like likability equals suffering plus trying plus love for others plus self-worth. I think one of the reasons I love Taylor so much is because she respects herself. She never lowers herself in front of anyone. She has all 4 components, just like Danny does. Bakuda and Gregor each have 3 out of the 4. Even Lung at this low point impresses me by being focused and disciplined, but even more so by the sense of quiet dignity that emanates from him. Anyway, Bakuda almost manages to escape when Dragon catches her. A tinker is so powerful we don't even see her. She's hiding behind a computer screen, operating large machines from afar. The best tinker in the world. We expect her to be monstrous. She is the warden whose job it is to send the innocent canary into a hole. But one of the first things she says is how she read about Canary's case and petitioned not to send her to the birdcage, ignoring the beautiful synergy between the 2 names. This is, again, an anagnorisis. Dragon is the first person we see that is not loyal but heroic in the same way that Taylor is, being altruistic towards a perfect stranger that could never pay them back. She also talks about rules and protocols, particularly about how Lung and Bakuda weren't tied up according to regulations. Rules, that thing that Taylor abandoned. I guess theoretically there is a distrusting interpretation in which all that Dragon thinks about is being seen as a sweetheart by the people who are monitoring her communications, but why would you even think that? Anyway, Bakuda, Lung, Dragon, and Gregor all have sides to them that Taylor never sees. This is what I meant when I said we are shown what Oranges tells. Quoting, "Everyone who tells a story tells it differently, just to remind us that everybody sees it differently. The only thing for certain is how complicated it all is, like string full of knots. It's all there, but hard to find the beginning and impossible to fathom the end. The best you can do is admire the cat's cradle and maybe knot it up a bit more." I feel like I've been relying heavily on Oranges, and it's time to prove to you that this reliance is justified. Coil's proposal and the fruit of knowledge. I said I won't talk about tactics in this analysis, but the banquet is really strange, and if the edit ever arrives, I think we should try to be tailors ourselves and patch this up. The Undersiders decide to take on the hardest and riskiest job yet, to crash the banquet full of heroes, troll them a little, then escape. The way the Undersiders take on 10 times more heroes than them is covering them all in darkness and then deciding which ones get out of the darkness, then fighting them in that patch of not darkness. Which is brilliant. Divide and conquer. Sure. But why not just fight in the darkness? Gru and Taylor beat people with their hands and baton, respectively, and that's easier in the darkness that Taylor can effectively see in. The dogs can be directed through a swarm of bugs pulling at Rachel. Can you imagine being hit by a dog like that in the dark? Damn. Lisa and Alec can be backup. That's all I have to say about that. Let's talk about morality. Taylor rages about the fact that Emma cowers and hugs her mother. That Emma has a mother. As if the injustice over causing Taylor's suffering is worse because Emma has so much more than Taylor does. I tend to agree, even though my initial formula didn't capture this. Anyway, Taylor traps herself again. Lisa again gets beat up by people who don't want to hear what she has to say, this time Armsmaster. The Undersiders escape by capitalizing on the weakness of authority, which is public relations. By controlling what's seen and isn't seen, they can make it seem like the heroes are the bad guys, something the heroes are very afraid of. Anyway, they escape. There's one more super important moment here. When they escape, they meet Armsmaster, who is accompanied by Dauntless. His power basically means that he can imbue his weapon with more power every day. At some point, he is predicted to be top dog, which is kind of hard on Armsmaster. This is, again, something that ruins the rest of the genre. In DC, Batman treats Superman like an equal, but why would he? He worked 1,000 times as hard. He plays the same game on an unbelievably harder difficulty setting. Superman has earned no respect from Batman. In Worm, Armsmaster hates Dauntless, and Tattletale tries to tell Dauntless exactly that. But Dauntless has headphones on, blocking Tattletale's attacks. Just like Glory Girl throwing Lisa into the wall, just like Bakuda telling her minions to shoot Tattletale the moment she speaks, he cuts off their communication. But unlike them, he puts on the headphones because Armsmaster told him to, and he trusts Armsmaster enough to do it. I wonder what's going to happen with that trust. Anyway, the Undersiders run into their boss's hideout, where the rest of his minions beat Armsmaster unconscious. I don't know why, I feel like I have to mention that moment when Trainwreck breaks Armsmaster halberd. There's so much spite in breaking someone's equipment that it took him hundreds of hours to build when he is unconscious. Coil reveals himself as the mysterious boss and congratulates the Undersiders on a job well done. He offers them a longer, more permanent contract. It's interesting how the person whose main action is just making offers is represented by one of the most memorable characters in Genesis. Do you remember who it is that only makes proposals, but by doing so screws over Adam and Eve, and by consequence, the rest of us? That's right, the snake, which is Coil's symbol. Coils tell the Undersiders how brilliant his own play was. He gave them super difficult jobs, and if they'd failed, he would have been a few enemies short. If they'd succeeded, he could just hire them. Coil is like Spider-Man's Kingpin, but instead of being told that he's smart, you actually see his moves making sense. He offers the Undersiders whatever they want, more or less, and they all either agree or are tempted by the offers. All but Rachel. Rachel simply doesn't trust Coil, and once again, she is fucking right. She recognizes something important in Coil in regards to his trustworthiness. By his own admission, he doesn't care if the Undersiders suffer, which is the opposite of how I define trust. There was something that confused me about Rachel here, and I noticed that confusion. How does Rachel's distrust of Coil sit with the fact that she treats her dogs like weapons? She loves her dogs, but still she goes on missions with them, risking their lives and regularly getting them hurt. Two answers. One is that she spends most of her free time taking care of dogs. She needs to be a supervillain to make the money to take care of the dogs, and she can't be a supervillain without sending her dogs to battle. She's got 99 problems. I already did that one, didn't I? Anyway, money can solve many of her problems. Armsmaster calls it cruelty to force an animal into a fight, but she's there in the fight herself, and she often gets beat up badly. Coil isn't in the battlefield with the Undersiders. He sends them ahead like Taylor sends bugs. I didn't talk about this so much in this video, but Taylor's whole excuse to stay with the Undersiders was that she's going to find out the identity of their boss and then betray them. After finding out, she doesn't have any more excuses to hang out with them. Taylor is in hell, and I love the hell that she is in. After more than a year of extremely intense loneliness, she has not just friends her age, but friends that went through the crucible with her. Blood is thicker than water was originally used to mean that the bond made with blood spilled in battle is stronger than the bond made by sharing the water of the womb. So Taylor is in her biggest dilemma. She wants to write a letter to the authorities to try to explain why she's been a villain, even though she's a good person, I guess. But how the hell is she supposed to betray her best and only friends? How is she going to resolve this? By looking back at happy memories of her mom. Forget about what we talked about so far. Forget about Moses, forget about Worm, forget about everything. Buckle the fuck in, because we are going to read some high fucking literature. I'm putting this page on the screen because I want to give you an opportunity to read it and use the keys we used so far to pick this bad boy apart. It's amazing to me that the page that no one remembers holds the answer to one of the hardest questions in this book. And we're going to go back to it in the last video of this series, assuming the sun doesn't explode by then. So, 10-year-old Taylor Hibbert is sitting at her mom's university lecture on the subject of the novel Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette motherfucking Winters, son. And Taylor not only follows along, she even answers the question because she's fucking smart and her mother has done her the awesome favor of getting her addicted to books at a young age. After she's done, a stranger compliments her for her good answer. The man turns out to be her mom's boss. He has a horrible comb-over. And after the lecture ends, Taylor asks her mom why nobody tells him that his hair is fucking embarrassing. Taylor's mom responds with the most important imperative sentence in this book. Look at it from his perspective. She explains that at some point the comb-over might have worked, but because his hair kept thinning gradually, he couldn't see how ridiculous it became. You need someone else to tell you what you look like from the outside, which is the mirror of the statement that the interludes make, and a relatively obvious parallel to future Taylor's gradual acceptance of a life of crime. Taylor, already an administrator at heart, tells her mom that she could tell her boss to just shave it all off, bro, and her mother agrees. A while later, her mom claims to have told him, and that he thanked her for her honesty. Whether or not that actually happened, Taylor's mom did give her the most important mission. In a book that is about the importance of seeing other perspectives, the protagonist embodies the message. Taylor goes around trying to understand how other people see the world. She doesn't excuse them, she doesn't forgive them, but she tries to understand. You would not believe me if I told you how late into writing this essay I realized that I forgot to look up the meaning of Annette's name. There was a moment of trepidation when I finally did. What if that's the first name that doesn't check out, and all of my nomenclatural analysis falls apart? But I took a deep breath, and got into Wikipedia, and typed in Annette name, and started reading. Annette is a diminutive of Anna. Anna, of course, comes from the Hebrew Chana. I didn't even have to look up Chana in the Bible. There's only one story about her that I remember. Chana couldn't have children, which for a woman at the time meant having no value as a human being. She prayed to God for fertility, promising that if she could bear a child, that child would become a monk and spend all of his life serving God on this earth. That child grew up to become the prophet Samuel, or Shmuel, who was a spiritual leader that believed that talking to the people should be enough to get them to act right. He wanted to be the opposite of Moses, but to his disappointment slowly realized that in order to keep the kingdom stable, he must crown a king to rule them. Fucking nailed it. Annette brought Taylor into being so that she could worship the same two-headed God that her mom did, love and understanding. A rose is a red thorny flower. A flower is a thing that you give to someone you love or place on their grave. Thorns are the secret ingredient to making a crown memorable. And the color red, well, sometimes the curtains are just blue, but not this time. So after reading this, we have a way better understanding of Annette. But Annette wasn't the only one to raise Taylor. Danny also worships the god of love, but he also worships, despite his best efforts, another god. Do you remember its name? The next video will be up in a week, in which we'll start with Danny's betrayal. Let's talk about God for a bit. I've taken a lot of things from this book. The insistence on not lying, the insistence on not doing things that I know are wrong, the preparedness to keep doing what I think is right, even when the world doesn't reward me, which is not the same thing. But most important, I think, is the courage to see other people's perspectives, especially people I don't agree with. And it is a courage when you allow yourself to see the perspective of a person you disagree with, to understand it, you expose yourself to the risk that they might be right. But if you are the kind of person who values truth over feeling good, and I think you are, you realize that there is, in fact, no risk at all. I feel like more than anything else, the problem in modern politics is that people on both sides of the discussion have no idea what the other side thinks or wants. And I'm genuinely ashamed to hear people whose opinions I agree with declare that they don't want to know what people on the other side are thinking because said people are either stupid or evil. It's like they don't remember that almost every human being holds on to a perspective in which they are justified. After living in Canada for a year, I went back to visit Israel and found that my perspective has shifted greatly. A lot of things that used to seem normal didn't anymore. I had the questionable luck of landing early in October 2023, just before the entire country's perspective shifted as a result of, and I'm not saying this to justify genuine acts of horror, a pretty severe trauma. I wrote a book not about politics and not about morality. There's nothing I could say that Slavoj Žižek didn't already say about the subject anyway, but about people and their perspectives. I spoke to everyday people, and I asked. Some of them I vehemently disagreed with. Some of them were killers. I had to make the decision of whether or not I wanted to communicate with these people, and I chose to do so. Link in the description. In my experience, when people notice that you are actually trying to understand how they are thinking without arguing with them or trying to change their mind, it becomes so easy for them to share their deepest issues with you. I developed it as a skill, and I did not develop it by accident. And as I've become this person people share things with, I've noticed how common it is to struggle with this one issue. Whether in family life or romance or business, people find it so hard to understand why other people see the world differently than they do. And in an act of genuine hubris, I hope that by listening, by withholding judgment and observing with curiosity and sincerity, I can inspire people to do the same. An echo of the inspiration that Walbo induced in me. This is the application of the karmic principle. The intertangled web of knots is not just made of actions and goals, it's made of people. Your actions in this world propagate and not only affect what other people experience, but affect who they become, just like you became who you are partly because of the actions of others. This is what I think the Buddha meant when he said there are no persons, only waves of karmic propagation. It's hard to explain how anti-religious growing up in Israel made me, even before I learned what religion is used as justification for. But this is a type of worship I can get behind, to go into the world knowing that every word and action echoes, and trying to make it a good echo. God, in this case, isn't all the perspectives. It isn't social cohesion. It's that web of interactions that you are a node in. This is basically what the philosopher Baruch Spinoza is known for, but sometime between 2,000 and 5,000 years prior, the Bhagavad Gita was told. In it, Prince Arjuna asks the god Krishna for advice in his time of crisis. And Krishna tells the prince, among other things, the entire world is my body, meaning that the entire world can be perceived as one entity that we are submerged in, or better yet, a part of. This is the kind of worldview that Spinoza and the Bhagavad Gita prescribe. But as much as I like reading these texts, they don't matter to me. What matters to me is that this is the perspective that Annette Rose Hibbert, one of the truest heroes of my favorite book ever, chose to teach the person she loved most in the entire world. Thank you for listening. Thank you to the beta viewers. If you enjoyed this, please send this to somebody else who might enjoy it as well. And until next time, propagate, you hear?